What's going on, everybody? It is Overreaction Time once again. I'm your host, Simon Samano, and look who I got with me for this episode. It is none other than the Boston shot caller, the guy I like to call the King of Kings, Nolan King. What is good, my man? How are you?
Doing well, man. Appreciate you having me back on. It's been a while. I was getting nervous that I wouldn't be invited back, but thank you for being so gracious and having me once again.
It has definitely been too long, but hey, we've got a lot to talk about, and I'm happy to get this thing started. So you ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right, Kamikaze, you know what time it is. Hit it.
I mean, guys, what are you fucking? Is this tonight's stupid question night? Are you guys that fucking stupid? You can't be that fucking stupid. Who gives a shit? One of the dumbest things I've ever read in my life. Fucking common sense. Everybody knows that.
All right, Nolan, let's start with this past Saturday at UFC Fight Night 250, otherwise known as UFC Saudia Arabia, where Israel Adesanya suffered his third consecutive loss when he was knocked out by Nasruddin Imavov in the second round of the main event. Now, if you watched the show last week with Goes, we talked about how this was a must-win for Izzy, and this ends up being the complete opposite, where he is finished. So let me go ahead and hit you with this now, Noli. After UFC Saudi Arabia, Israel Adesanya is cooked as a middleweight title contender.
I think that's an overreaction, and I'll tell you why.
Wow.
I think if you look at the way that historic as a contender, maybe as a champion, I don't think he'll get back to holding gold, but I think sometimes we forget how much weight somebody's name can hold in getting them matchups that make sense for them to get back. Like the division right now, if you look at it at this point in time, kind of in a, if we put our tunnel vision on and we just look at what's going on right now, you might look at it and say, hey, look at who's above him, right? There's Dricus that beat him. There's Strickland that beat him. Now Imavov's above him. He beat him. So he's got three guys essentially in front of him that have already beaten him and that have beaten him soundly. Two of them finished him. One of them dominated him. So there's really no clear path to the title. He's got to get up some momentum. First of all, he's got to, kind of rack up some wins. But for me, I think if time passes, if different contenders emerge, if Dricus loses the belt, who knows what Kyle Barallo is going to do? There's all sorts of things that can happen. So I think in terms of him being at the top of that division and being a contender, I wouldn't say necessarily that he's cooked, because he's got that advantage where when he comes back, when he's ready, I think the UFC is going to put him in a fight that is not only one that he probably actually has a little bit of say in what kind of matchups made, but also one that they perhaps see as a big fight for him too. He's kind of got that privilege from what he's accomplished. So I don't think he's cooked as a contender. I think to say that he couldn't have success and go on to become a champion, then that's where you would get me. That I would agree with that.
Okay. So then what is that fight? What is the fight? How long are we talking here now too? Because, Izzy's in this got to go back to the drawing board mode. He was already there not too long ago where he said he was going to take some time off. Here we go again, going to take some time off, figure it out. But what is that fight then, Nolan, when he comes back? How is he going to get back to another title shot potentially?
It's tough. I think the thing that's working against him, and this is a little outside the box here, but I think at this point in his career, if he was in a different division or if he was a different person with a different build, this would be a time to try to explore maybe a different weight class, right? But he doesn't really have that advantage because he's very much built for 185. I mean, we saw when he fought Jan Blachowicz a couple years ago, it was very obvious the size and strength, difference that he had fighting a real light heavyweight. I mean, he weighed 202 or 203 pounds on the scale. So he doesn't have that luxury. So he is kind of stuck to a certain degree. And that's why I think, taking some time off, for relative to him, taking 6 months off, 9 months off, will let things kind of figure themselves out. You got Barallo, you've got guys like Anthony Hernandez that are coming up. Who knows who's going to kind of creep into the top five. So, and who knows how this fight next weekend is going to play out too. Things might work out where he comes back and a fight with Sean Strickland kind of makes sense. Maybe they both need to get back on the horse and fight again. So, I think something like a fighter that is a contender that needs to be rebuilt like him, or perhaps somebody that's building up like the couple guys I named, Barallo, Hernandez, somebody like that could be also in the future.
Noli, I got to tell you, man, I got to be honest. When you bring up the names like Kyle Barallo and Anthony Hernandez, what goes through my head is gatekeeper. I hate thinking of Izzy as a gatekeeper, man, but that's what I think of now, And I mean, listen, let me just tell you this, all right? I think Izzy's done competing for a championship. I don't think he's going to get back there. Clearly, I've told you that. I think he's cooked as a contender. And I think we're entering gatekeeper mode, which is really sad for me to think about, because last week we talked about this with Goes. We needed Izzy to win. We needed him to win definitively. We needed a big name like Izzy to stay at the top. The fact that he's not there anymore hurts. Now, what I will say, though, Nolan, is I really do think Izzy did this to himself. I think he did this to himself because I think he started believing in his own hype at some point. You know, he had that string of fights after the Jan Blachowicz fight where he failed to win the light heavyweight title. That string of fights that happened afterward, those title defenses against Marvin Vettori, against Jared Cannonier, against Robert Whittaker, those fights were a lot of cases of overhype, underdeliver, where Izzy was talking so much, right? And those fights were just like him outpointing guys. You know, they were boring, they were dull. It was almost like he started just fighting not to lose, and that hurt Izzy. You know, that really did hurt Izzy. I felt like, and I don't know. I just feel like mentally he started believing his own hype too much, and it really changed who he was as a fighter. You know, then you get into the losses, and then everything went out the door after that, right? The Alex Pereira loss, you know, Strickland, Duplessis, like he's better than those last two guys. He's better than those two guys. But the only way I can explain it is that Izzy just mentally doesn't have it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, those are all good points, and I think they're things that should be addressed. I do think that sometimes we overlook, and I have talked to a lot of like coaches about this too, is just like the age and wear and tear issue, and just being a fighter that's getting up there in fight years and life years. Sometimes everybody's looking for an explanation, right? Oh, you know, maybe he's going to fix his technique. Maybe he's in his own head. Maybe, you know, he didn't fight smarter. He believed his hype. Like there's an element where I'm like, this just kind of happens to people too. Like aging fighters, they maybe aren't as quick. Maybe the things that they were insufficient at, you know, maybe like the sequence of the finish we saw on Saturday, like maybe his reflexes are just a little not what they used to be, or maybe, you know, he should his reads are a little bit off just from going through these wars and not being quite the fighter he was. Like I think there's a natural element too, but it's so hard because there's so many different aspects of fighting. There's the element of like you put these guys in the cage 10 times with the outcomes that we saw. Are they the most likely? Like, was this the one time that Nasruddin could have beaten him? Is he put out a good first round? But you need a bigger sample size. And to look at the last 5 fights for Izzy, obviously he's been in the loss column quite a bit. So I'm glad I'm not a coach. I'm glad I'm not like a fight breakdown guy, because I think I would be extremely frustrated, like going back and having to really look at the tape and try to figure out, is this something we can fix, or is this something that just is the way that human life is and the way that fighters age? So that's for Eugene Behrman, and I guess we'll see what they come up with, because it's at a time where I'm not really sure what the answer is. I don't know how you fix this at this point.
Okay, I need you to entertain one more thought for me on Izzy, okay?
Sure.
On Saturday night after I watched the fight, I put a tweet out there that there was no telling how much greater Izzy could have been if Alex Pereira had never come to the UFC. We just talked about the mental aspect. And of course, when Alex came, he had lost to him, you know, twice in kickboxing. He was the boogeyman. They had their 2 fights, right? Gets knocked out, which made his comeback to knock him out in the rematch even greater. And it just felt like that was the biggest flex for Izzy too. And like he had just slayed his demon, slayed the dragon, conquered, you know, his biggest evil, his biggest threat. And like that maybe just relieved so much pressure that, you know, that was it. That was the highest point that he reached. Because I just think 35, like you talk about him, the wear and tear, I didn't expect this from Izzy at 35. I think he still has the skills. But man, Alex, I think just changed everything for him. Would you agree with that to any degree?
To a certain degree. I mean, to me, like it's kind of it's weird to weigh their legacies because they're so intertwined. And I think Alex kind of stole his thunder a little bit, right? Like he came in and he kind of did what Izzy was trying to do, and he did it better, and he was more exciting, and he got the fanfare. And like I think that's not to overshadow what Izzy's done. Like I think, you know, if the world blows up tomorrow, Israel Adesanya is the second greatest middleweight in MMA history, essentially. So, and Alex has kind of got this weird legacy, almost like DC, right? Where, you know, he's one of the greatest fighters of all time, but you can't really put him in He's not the greatest middleweight of all time. He's not the greatest light heavyweight of all time. So I think Izzy does have that sort of accolade, the accolades in his back pocket you can't argue with. I think the biggest disservice to him was not being able to have, that third fight in MMA. I think for me, that would be the one that would really propel him, and kind of help rebound his legacy a little bit.
Well, maybe there's a path. Maybe there's a path to do that at 205 or something. Izzy's competed there before. Maybe that's the one. We'll see. But man, it saddens me that we're talking about Izzy in this sense. I'd love to see a comeback, but I just don't see it, man. I don't see a comeback to his career. Yeah. All right, man. Let's move on to the next thing. We're going to talk about a topic that I wish we weren't really talking about, Nolan, and that's Bryce Mitchell's comments last week on his podcast. Of course, as we know, Bryce went on this pro Adolf Hitler rant last week, which even by MMA standards, caught everybody by surprise. And those standards are very low when it comes to, stuff like this, when we're talking about ignorant comments, racist comments, homophobic comments, right? But this was kind of a new low. It felt like a new low even for MMA. Well, Dana White, he did come out and he did address it at the Power Slap event later that day. And I want to go ahead and have Abby Kamikaze go ahead and play those for us.
Hitler is one of the most disgusting and evil human beings to ever walk the face of the earth. And anyone that even tries to take an opposing position is a moron. That's the problem with the internet and social media. You provide a platform for a lot of dumb, ignorant people. We've obviously reached out to Bryce, and when we read what he said and let him know how we feel about it, we're beyond disgusted. So for those of you that don't know what's going on, good, you're lucky. That's what everybody wants to hear about punishments. Free speech. I don't have to love it. You don't have to love it.
I agree with that, the free speech sentiment. Is there a concern, though, right, if he goes out and wins a fight and gets a mic?
Well, that's the beautiful thing about this business. For all of you that hate Bryce Mitchell, you get to see him hopefully get his ass whooped on global television. I mean, what do you want me to say about it? You know where I am with free speech. We're disgusted.
All right, Nolan. So we heard from Dana White there, came out with some strong words against Bryce Mitchell. But let me go and hit you with this here now, Nolan. Dana White only condemning Bryce Mitchell's pro-Hitler rant without action was not enough.
I don't think that's an overreaction. I think we've talked about this quite a bit, right? And over time, there's been all sorts of things that fighters have said and done that don't get repercussions, and the subject matter kind of falls in the discussion ends up leading towards the free speech thing that Dana brings up quite a bit, right? Mm-hmm. The difference with this one was that the UFC seemed to actually somewhat care, or at least publicly wanted to condemn those ideas. Like, I think we had reached out to them. I'm sure other outlets did for comment. And so I say this to a certain degree, but the UFC did try to get ahead of it. Like Dana sat down at that press conference and started saying, talking about it. So this was a little bit different in that the approach that they took. I'm a little bit not surprised, but it is interesting to hear this be like, this was, like you said, it was a new low. But it was interesting that we haven't really, at least in modern times, see them take this approach for other things, right? Where, if Sean Strickland said something, Dana could say, I don't like this thing. I don't agree with it. Like that whole first part was missing from things that we've heard before. To me, again, like if this could be, we could have a segment on this for hours. I don't think that's an overreaction. I think there's a freedom of speech. Sure, people can say what they want. There's also, I think, the freedom of Dana White and the company to hand out some repercussions, right? And I know we can get into the debate of what those things can look like for contractors or whatever, but I mean, there is always the threat of getting rid of somebody, of cutting them. Sure. I do think that they, in theory, to my knowledge, they do still sign a code of conduct policy. I'm not sure if that.
Are we sure about that?
I believe it's still I think it's still in the promotional agreements as part of it. So, I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and read through that again to see if there's other things that gives them leeway to, delay giving you fights or something. But I definitely think if there was a time that they were going to do something, this would have been it. I'm not sure what the next step would be. Like, is there something that could be said that would be worse, that would get, is there anything that would get
That's the
some sort of
question.
reaction?
Yeah, that is the question.
I mean, this, and the thing was about this one, like, you know, I definitely think the magnitude of this comment, it reached, like, Bryce Mitchell was trending in the United States in the top 10 on a day that the plane helicopter crash happened in DC. There's all sorts of things with the new president going on. Like, this wasn't like a slow news day or something.
No.
You know, this was something that became a major story in a pretty busy period of time. So I think Dana in the UFC, like, they kind of, I'm not justifying it, they dug themselves, they put themselves in a position, right, where if they had done something at the same time, I think they would have made themselves look, it's tough, right? Like, Dana would have to go back on some of the things that he said.
I get you.
I
no, well, this
they're just willing not to do, you know?
Well, this is the problem, man, is that even Dana's message up there, you know, he called Bryce Mitchell a dumb and ignorant and stupid person. He must have done that about a dozen times or so, if not more. And he says in his, what we just heard, that the problem with social media is that dumb people have a platform. Well, but then the UFC is giving this ignorant and dumb person a platform. Like, the UFC is part of the problem. How is he so obtuse that he just doesn't see that or realize it, or just doesn't care? Because Bryce Mitchell is only relevant as a person because he is a UFC fighter. That's part of the problem. If he's not a UFC fighter, then he's just another dumb, ignorant person spouting BS on the internet, right? And we don't care about it. We're not writing stories. It's not making headlines. But that's the part that baffles me with Dana, and which is why I'll just say everything he said, yeah, sure, to his credit, he addressed it. He got out in front of it. He didn't wait for a question. But really, without action, it's just hollow words that mean nothing.
Right. And I mean, that's the biggest thing. And if you go back and look, and again, we could spend hours trying to figure out where that line is or whatever. And I get it. The thing that makes it a little difficult sometimes is, like, you know, I do think there's an element of fighters say things that maybe other athletes couldn't get away with. This is a sport where people punch and kick each other in the head. They are supposed to build fights. They're supposed to say insulting things. But I think we're pretty clear on what the line probably should be here. And so for them to kind of have this history where it's actually interesting, because if you go back and for some of the fans maybe that were over the pandemic that just jumped in and kind of getting familiarized with the sport, the approach that the promotion's taken now is very different than what they used to do. I mean, I remember you can find the clip somewhere. I believe it was Ariel Helwani was doing an interview with Dana White about some comments that Matt Mitrione had made about Fallon Fox, who was like the first kind of well-known transgender fighter, right? And he had said some stuff. And I think Dana actually in that video, if you watch it, it's like kind of like something from a different universe. Like, he's like, you know, he says, again, I don't want to misquote him. You can look up the clip for yourself, but it was something along the lines of like, you know, I know people are calling for this, you know, for freedom of speech or whatever. He's like, you say that kind of stuff in any company in the world, you're going to get in trouble. You're going to get fired. You're going to, you know, he's like, this isn't that sort of issue. So it is interesting. I don't know if we can pinpoint a moment in time where the promotion kind of took a different approach to this whole thing. Like, you know, there were other times, like, I know everybody brings up the Miguel Torres thing where he tweeted something that was a joke from a comedy special that was about a rape van or something. You know, I think he got some sort of reprimands for that. I think there were times, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, different gay slur stuff. So I'm interested. It would be very interesting to hear like why the approach has changed. Because I think that first thing that Dana kind of laid out there, what I was saying about when he was talking to Ariel about Mitrione, seems to be like the complete opposite argument to what he says now.
Yeah. My answer to that would probably be COVID. COVID would probably be like the point, right? Because that's where it became about, you know, cowering and being silenced, and, you know, a lot of freedoms were being taken away, yada, yada, yada. That's what people said, right? And like the UFC really used that as like motivation to just, no, we're going to do whatever we want. We're going to do this. And we're not stopping, you know? I would say COVID was probably the point, but man, this whole thing, if Bryce Mitchell, who's like a mid UFC fighter, can't get released after talking about Adolf Hitler in a positive light, if he doesn't get released, then I don't know that anybody will ever get released from this company for their comments. But hey, man, you know, that's what we're doing. It's all in the name of free speech, my friend. But all right, let's move on from that topic. And let's go on and get back to some fight stuff. All right. This past week, Dana White, we'll still talk about Dana here a little bit, though. Sorry, we're not moving on from Dana completely. But Dana White had an interview with Oscar Willis of the Mac Life, where he made some comments about Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. Now, if you didn't see it, Nolan, Oscar, he specifically had asked Dana if they will consider stripping Jon Jones and moving on with Aspinall. And Dana's response to that question was, quote, 100%. If we don't get the fight done, we move on and we make another fight. Listen, man, if you've watched this show, Noli, and I hope you have, you've heard me say that this was going to get into a territory where it was going to get ugly. So let me just hit you with a newsflash, Nolan. We are not getting Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall this year.
Overreaction. I think we get it.
Nah, man, we're not getting it. It's not happening.
This might be the inner fan in me wanting it.
It is not happening.
I think Dana's put too many eggs in one basket, man. I mean, he keeps coming out and saying this, and oh, it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. Not that he hasn't backtracked on things before, and not that he's been wrong and not been wrong, but to me, I feel like this fight is too big at this point for the UFC not to have happen. I mean, you got one party involved that seems to be clearly in on it. Like, I don't think Tom has any qualms about the negotiation.
I'm sure he'll take whatever money they're willing to give him, right?
100%. Like, he's probably in a very comfortable position where he's set. So it's really figuring out Jon, which obviously Jon's a big question mark when it comes to any fight. But I do think the amount of attention and money this fight would generate would be bigger than anything we've seen in a while. So I think it's a bigger, there's potential for Jon to actually get even to get the biggest payday that he's had in quite a bit as well. So I don't know, man. I still have hope for it. It's only been a few months. Like, I don't think if we're sitting, 8, 9, 10, 11 months or something, I'd start to get a little bit nervous, but we're still within that pace of, like, waiting for the heavyweight title fight to get booked. I don't think we have to panic yet. And I mean, look at the division right now. What else are we going to do? Right? What else are we going to do? Who else are we going to do? We're going to have Sergey Pavlovich fight Aspinall again after last weekend. Like, the UFC needs this,
I don't know. I mean, you could have Alex Pereira move up to heavyweight and fight Tom Aspinall. You could.
Yeah, I mean, that's super intriguing too. I honestly, I'm one of the people when it comes to, I know Jon keeps bringing up other options of, fighting Alex, or the Jon Alex fight too. To me, like, I'm probably in the minority just because so many people want to see the Aspinall fight. I love that fight.
I'm there. I'm right there with you, man. Yeah, absolutely. But listen, dude, here's the thing. Dana White, man, how do you go from a guarantee 6 weeks ago to 6 weeks later, we're ready to move on if we can't make the fight? Like, how you think he's not that confident in making the fight, man, right?
Haven't watched it. The way I took it was, Oscar was saying, is there a point where, if it comes to be July and you haven't booked this yet, would you move on?
But isn't that a target date? Isn't making that fight in July a target? Wouldn't that be a target date, International Fight Week?
Well, I mean, if
are we really going to wait till November and MSG a full year of no Jon Jones?
You could. I think those guys, again, are sitting on enough money from their last fights where they don't necessarily need to go. If Jon wants to fight once a year, they're going to say, fine, we'll wait till November. So I don't know, if you make the fight by July, you're probably looking at October, November, probably that MSG show that you said. So again, if we're talking about this in July, then I'd be a little bit nervous. If we're talking about it in June, I'd maybe be a little bit nervous, or May, but still sitting here in February, where even, because the thing is too, that I think people are kind of overlooking is, like, Jon said the thing about, he wants it to be the last one. I'm going to have this be my last fight. Kind of is dodging talking about the Aspinall, but keeps bringing up other fights. So obviously he's clearly got in his brain that he's not out on competition. I don't think.
Well, he wanted to.
Issue.
Yeah. Well, he keeps bringing up other fights. The fight that he wanted was the Alex Pereira fight. I mean, he was very adamant about that before 309. I mean,
unless he's playing. I think the thing about Jon is, like, he's obviously pretty confusing to people, and I think people get very rightfully so aggravated at some of the things that he says. But at the same time, I do think he's somebody that has advocated for himself better than a lot of fighters have. And sometimes it's cost him. I mean, there was that period of time in his career where he was essentially, when he vacated light heavyweight title, was doing that heavyweight move. He couldn't really get on the same page with the UFC. Like he brought in Richard Schaefer. There was that whole thing. But it seems like he's at a point where he was the last couple of fights was pretty happy with what he got. So I think this could be just him saying this sort of stuff to have the UFC have to shell up in an attempt to have the UFC shell up more.
All right. Well, listen, I'm just saying, man, like I know he said he wants the FU money, and I don't know what that number is. Obviously there was the 30 million figure that was thrown out. Then there was like, well, you asked for 30 and maybe you get 20, but I mean, I don't know what the number is, but like clearly it sounds to me like you have to make Jon Jones really happy to take this fight, because he has said, and I believe him here. You tell me if I'm full of it here, but I believe Jon here, Nolan, when he said about Tom Aspinall initially, like he doesn't want to just fight the next big thing. He's got 2 generations worth of fighting the next big thing, the next big threat, right? So in order for him to take this fight at 37 years old, he'll be 38 soon, I believe, against the next big threat, you're going to have to pay him the FU money. I mean, I believe him, dude. And that's why I don't think he's going to settle for anything less than whatever it is that, his comfortable number. And are we sure the UFC is going to be willing to reach that comfortable number? That's the point. They don't want to give in to anybody these days.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree on that aspect. But I do think, again, this fight, when it first started getting talked about, when Tom first won the interim title, it did have that feel to me, even like, okay, this guy, Tom Aspinall, has proven himself. He is title challenger worthy. Like this guy could beat Jon Jones, but it was kind of like the next man up sort of feel. I think since that time, the amount of anticipation, the amount of discussion, the amount of conversation has made this fight maybe actually something that would mean something to Jon's legacy. The guy that people talked about for 2 years as being the next big heavyweight that went out there, who had beat all the other guys, and kind of the stars have aligned for them to fight. I do think this has maybe, and we saw the reaction at a press conference. I forget which one it was. It must have been the one in New York with Jon and Stipe, where this fight got brought up. The other fight hadn't even happened. And people were going,
basically hijacked it. Yeah, they hijacked it.
So I think Jon does recognize what this would do for his bank account, his legacy. And I do think people talk about the period Jon was gone and the whole thing with Francis and he was ducking Francis. I do think that the big thing about Jon coming back was that he wanted to do 2 more fights, and he wanted them to be Stipe and he wanted to be Francis. Like that was everything that I was hearing when he finally kind of came to good terms with the UFC, that he told them, I want these 2 fights because I think they're going to, be fighting the current heavyweight champ and fighting the greatest heavyweight of all time will do something for my legacy, and then I want to be done. And instead he got Cyril Gane, which, he got the heavyweight title. It's cool.
Win the heavyweight title, yeah.
Like you got a double champ status. So that did something for him. Stipe did something for him in his brain, where I beat the greatest heavyweight ever. So does this Aspinall fight have enough of that for him? He can only answer that, but I do think it has more. I think it's more in that direction than it was, say, 6 months ago.
All right. Well, I'm glad you feel confident, because I don't feel confident. But hey, pay the man, Dana White. Pay the man. We got to see that fight. If it's the biggest fight of all time, like he's already said, then pay the man. That's all I got to say. I can't believe here I am stumping for Jon Jones, man. God, I never thought I would do that, but here I am doing it. This show's crazy like that, All right, man. Let's move on from the heavyweight division in the UFC to another heavyweight fight talk discussion here, where we're trying to figure out what's happening with Francis Ngannou, right? Like, what's going to come of Francis's next fight? What's going to be next for him with the PFL? And on MMA Junkie Radio this past week, they had Ben Rothwell on the show, dude. All right. Ben talking about, how he'd love to fight Francis Ngannou. He mentioned Mark Hunt, but Francis Ngannou, and he mentioned that he thinks it's realistic, that it's possible, dude. I'm going to tell you right now, man, Ben Rothwell is the most compelling option for Francis Ngannou's next fight. I'm in. I'm all in, dude.
I don't think that's an overreaction. I think there's probably like 2 or 3 guys that I would put like at the top of that list. And I think, to me, what makes the most amount of sense, and it would have to mean that PFL would be a little bit more willing to work with other promotions. We saw the Bellator era, Scott Coker, Bellator era was willing to do it, whether it was with Ryzen. They lent some guys to bare knuckle, over the years. So in other Russian promotions, they let fighters fight in. So if PFL is willing to do something like that, I think probably the next move for Francis would be to try to do, and I don't want to call it necessarily like a co-promotion, but like, work with another promotion, have your heavyweight champ fight theirs. Maybe they get a little piece of the pie as well. Like, I think something like that would be cool. You obviously got Ben Rothwell. You could go overlook it like KSW. They have Phil DeFry, who's been on a great run since he left the UFC. Somebody like that, I think, kind of like putting your champ up against another champ is probably the way to go, considering the field of or lack thereof of heavyweights that are good, heavyweights that have name recognition, heavyweights that would you could put on a poster next to Francis Ngannou versus him just being on a poster that he's fighting. I love the idea. I love the fight. I just would come down to PFL, BKFC. Can they do something like Bellator did with them?
Right. Well, you mentioned Phil DeFry from KSW. There's been talk of Rico Verhoeven, the Glory kickboxing champion. Maybe Vadim Nemkov, who's already on the PFL roster. But the thing is, the difference between those guys, though, and Ben Rothwell, man, he has completely reinvented himself as this brawling badass in BKFC. Like I don't know if I say star power. I guess it's star power, right? Like, is Ben Rothwell a star? I guess it's at the highest it could ever be, right? Like, he just won the BKFC heavyweight title with another demolishing victory. He's 4-0 in BKFC. He's been awesome since he left the UFC as a BKFC fighter. To me, it's very marketable and promotable, this fight between Francis and big brawling badass Ben Rothwell. Like, it's perfect, dude. I mean, that to me is the one it's the one that I would take over any of those other three we mentioned, unless something out of left field happens where the UFC releases somebody, or, somehow, some way, somebody from like the GFL roster. I don't know, like something like that. But man, Ben Rothwell, he's earned it too. He's earned it, in my opinion. So let's give it to him. That's the one I want to see.
Two big dudes too. Like, Ben, I think when he was in the UFC, had to cut weight. Like, if you look at I forget what he weighed in the other night, but BKFC doesn't have maybe they do go to 265. I thought they've had some super heavyweight fights too.
I don't know if they go to. I don't know if they do. He mentioned not liking that they would go to 265, but he would do it. Like in an MMA fight, he mentioned he would do it. He prefers to fight Francis in boxing or bare knuckle. I don't see that happening. If this fight happens, it would be in MMA. It's going to have to be on those.
You're giving me flashbacks here. Like, I remember when the Scott Coker era, right? They did that. What was it called? Glory Dynamite, where they had the cage and then they had the kickboxing.
They do that. They used to promote kickboxing. That's why. Yeah.
Maybe they could do something cool where they have some of the PFL guys do bare knuckle or something, and have Francis and Ben fight in MMA at the end or something. I think there's opportunity there. BKFC's done a great job of making themselves their own entity. They're not necessarily a competitor, but they're something that can coexist in the MMA community and be different. So I think there's the opportunity here for PFL to do something really cool with them. They just got to put, get the egos out of the way a little bit and have that happen.
But there shouldn't be any egos, man. PFL needs some publicity, and some good publicity. BKFC's on the rise. It's just they need that. Like, it's too perfect for both promotions, I think.
Yeah, I agree totally.
Yeah, let's get it, man.
Sorry, I can't argue with you on this one.
No, it's okay. Big Ben against Francis Ngannou. Let's get it going, man. Let's go. Sign me up. I'm in.
100%.
So, all right, man. Let's close out the show with one last topic as we look ahead to this weekend, UFC 312, going down under in Sydney, Australia, where we've got 2 title fights on the top of the card. In the main event, it's a rematch between middleweight champion Jon Strickland. And in the co-main event, we've got strawweight champion Zhang Weili coming back against Tatiana Suarez. Top heavy card outside of that. So it's not much of a card outside of those 2 fights. So we're going to focus on those 2 fights. I'm going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone here, Nolan, and hit you with this one. All right. Tatiana Suarez is more likely than Sean Strickland to be crowned and new at UFC 312.
I totally agree with you. Not an overreaction.
I can't get you to disagree with me on anything this week.
Now I'm definitely not coming back.
We're like the last 3 or 4 in a row. All right, let's go.
Yeah.
Hit me with
I'm never picking against Strickland ever again, because I think I picked every single one of his fights.
Talked about that before.
So that's the main. No, that's not the main factor. But I think Suarez is just so intriguing, right? Like, this is the moment, and sure, it's not been a perfect build. There's been a lot of bumps. There's been injuries. There's been cancellations, but it's really time to just see what the skills are all about. Sure, like, other contenders have had more opportunity to show what they have in the cage and to build themselves and fight top contenders. We've always thought she's really damn good, but we haven't really seen the ceiling. And now we have the opportunity to see, is that ceiling above Zhang Weili? And it very well could be. Whereas the main event, I feel like watching that first fight, I know there was some people had scored for Strickland. I believe Dana White was one of them. I felt like watching that fight when I watched it the first time, and when I watched it again, I felt pretty confident that Dricus had done enough. And I think now that Dricus is rolling a little bit, he's got the Adesanya win under his belt. To me, Strickland hasn't necessarily impressed me over the last couple. I feel confident that we'll see a similar fight, like a good fight. We'll have, be fun, brawl sort of thing. But I feel like Dricus, I expect him to win similarly, but maybe even more decisively.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, Sean Strickland just doesn't strike me as a guy who's going to make a lot of adjustments. Like, he's a flat-footed fighter who fights the same pretty much every time. I think he's probably trying to refine stuff. And look, I don't want to say that, and it's like I'm being insulting to Eric Nixick and the crew at Extreme Couture, but like, I'm sure Eric Nixick has been working hard, studying film, right? What they can do different. I'm just not sure that Sean Strickland's going to be that good at employing those changes in the fight, because he just has a style. It's different. It's different training compared to once you're in there. Like, do you stick to the game plan, or does it go out the window, right? The moment you take that first punch, or the moment you feel like you can do what you've been doing. Whereas, so that's why I don't see Strickland doing anything different. I'm with you. But whereas with this fight with Tatiana and Zhang Weili, Zhang Weili's mostly fought all strikers, and yes, she did beat Carla Esparza, who's a wrestler, but not on the level of Tatiana Suarez. Like, Tatiana's going to bring that Khabib-like mentality of trying to take you down, and I'm just not sure that Zhang Weili will be able to handle it. That's why I feel pretty good about Tatiana coming away with the victory this Saturday. Is that crazy?
No, I think it's a tough fight in my head. It's one that I haven't sent my staff picks to Matt Erickson yet this week, because I'm still kind of bouncing it around. Like, we kind of have Zhang Weili where we know what she does. We know she's really good. She's been proven. I think we know what she's about. Where Suarez, she hasn't faced somebody like Zhang Weili.
She hasn't either. It's true.
So it's like, there's always an element. I think sometimes I side too much with the proven versus the unproven. Like, I'm not willing to take that risk of, like, where does Suarez fall, above her or below her? But I think with this one, I've just really liked the skills that I've seen from Suarez. I think stylistically, she poses a lot of unique threats for that division. And I think she's somebody that can kind of match that physicality from Zhang Weili, which we don't really see fighters being able to do that. So, if you ask me right now at this point in time, and people can check the staff picks later in the week to see if I flip-flop, but I think I'd be with you, man. I'm kind of leaning towards her to walk away as champion.
Yeah, I also think it's the best outcome for the UFC. New champion in the strawweight division. A lot of good fights, fun fights that you can make with Tatiana. So that's the one. I think she's the one to get it. It's more likely. Dude, I can't believe we agree this much, Nolan. We're supposed to be disagreeing, bro.
Must be like a full moon or something. Yeah, crazy, but
good times, man. Good times. Well, the time for overreacting has come to an end. Dude, I appreciate you being back. Sorry it took so long. We're gonna make sure we shorten the time. We'll get you back on sooner next time, all right?
All right, can't wait, man. I already got the countdown clock going.
All right, guys. Well, for everybody who's tuned in this long, I appreciate you. Please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying the show. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, we will see you on Overreaction Time. So long.
MMA Junkie AI.